Okay, so we're done taking a look at the deployment plan. What we're going to do now is version our application and deploy that to WebLogic. So go ahead and exit the editor. So there are two methods for versioning an application. We can use the manifest.mf file where we define a version string, or we can define a version when we deploy using WebLogic.deployer. So I want to assume that we're an administrator and that we're not in the business of cracking open archive files, modifying them to include version strings. That's something that would typically be done during the build process for that archive file. So however, if you receive an archive file that does not have a version string, I wouldn't modify the archive file. I would just simply specify this at the command line using WebLogic.deployer. So first things first, we need to delete the existing application because it's not versioned. So let's go ahead and delete it. So go back to the admin console, and on the deployments tab, go ahead and find main web app. And delete it. So it looks like I've already deleted it from this console. Now, go back to the terminal window and make sure to source your WebLogic environment script like we did in the previous lab. So make sure you source the set WLS env from the WebLogic server bin directory. So under Oracle Home, WL server, server, bin, set WLS env. So that's now sourced. Now I can execute WebLogic.deployer to deploy to version and deploy our application. So this is I'm going to introduce here some new deployment flags that you haven't seen before. So when we deployed in the previous lab on application deployment, we specified the bare minimum flags. We specified the admin URL, the username and password to connect to the admin server, the action, which was to deploy, and the location of the archive to deploy. So let's start with typing Java WebLogic.deployer and specifying the admin URL again. So t3://localhost 7001, and then specify the username and password again. And don't forget the action. This is very important. So -deploy. Now we're going to specify the name of the deployment. We could override it, and that's what this flag is for. But let's use the default since it's working for us today. And then we specify the source, which will be the application, the exploded archive directory itself, and not the application install directory. For some reason, when you're deploying using a deployment plan and specifying an application version, and you're using the deployer command, you need to specify the application source directory and not the install directory. So make sure you use a fully qualified path here and specify the location of the exploded archive directory, which is going to be under our lab home, applications, export, main web app 1.0, app, and then main web app again. So recall that we copied the exploded archive directory into this app directory. Okay, then you're going to specify the targets flag. The targets flag identifies the targets where you want to deploy the application to. So when we don't specify this, the default target is the admin server. Now in this domain, there are actually, and we could specify additional managed servers or a cluster even. But for this lab, we only have the admin server, so let's stick with the admin server. And we'll specify that explicitly. And then you can specify the staging mode. If you recall, there were 3 staging modes. There was stage no stage, and external stage. Let's explicitly set the staging mode, and that is the -stage flag. And then we can specify the deployment plan, and that's -plan in the fully qualified path to the plan. And last but not least is the app version flag, which specifies the version of this application, and we're calling it 1.0. So once you have all that, make sure you look over the syntax and you've got every flag specified and nothing's mistyped, and hit enter. So I've got that annoying pop-up again for the main web application, but it looks like it worked. So let's minimize the browser for a second and take a look at the output from the deployer command. So you can see here where we're initiating the deploy operation, and it's using this archive. Now take a look at the deployment output. We can see that there's now a version identifier associated with the application. So that's a good sign that this worked. So go ahead and switch over to the admin console and click on the deployments link underneath the domain structure window. And this will refresh the page. And if we scroll down, we should see a version number next to main web app. And we do. So that's great. We've specified a version for this application, which is going to allow us to perform a production redeployment of this application. So now what we're going to do is we're going to version this application. So go back to your terminal window and create a copy of the main web app 1.0 directory, but call it 2.0. So what I'm going to do is create a main web app 2.0 directory, and within that, and then within that, I'm going to copy the contents of main web app 1.0. So I should now have an exact copy of 1.0, but underneath 2.0. So we're assuming that we've received a version 2.0 of the main web app application, and we've created a directory, an app install directory to support that deployment. In this lab, we simply just copied the files, and we're not going to really change them. The only thing that we're going to change, though, is the app version when we deploy. So let's go ahead and upgrade this application in place. And we'll do that. And if you're in the same terminal window that you were using before when you deployed the application, just cursor up until you find, the syntax for the WebLogic deployer command. And all you have to do here, let's just change some of the paths. So I need to change the source. The source is going to point to the 2.0 directory. And the plan is going to point to the 2.0 directory as well. And most importantly, make sure you change the -app version flag to 2.0 and then hit enter. And there's that pop-up again. So it looks like the application was deployed, but was it upgraded in a zero downtime fashion? So let's go ahead and take a look at the output of the command, and you'll see that version 2.0 was deployed. So switch over to the terminal window for the admin server and take a look at the output from the admin server. And you can see here that according to WebLogic, there is that version 1.0 has one pending session. And so once that session expires, WebLogic will gracefully transition the old app to the new app. So if you recall, we changed the session timeout to 600 seconds. Well, we're not going to wait 10 minutes, so Let's go back to the admin console and refresh this page. Click on deployments to refresh it and scroll down again, and notice that there are two entries in our deployments table. We have main web app 1.0 and main web app 2.0. So 2.0 is now active, but check out the state for main web app 1.0. It's in a stop running state. So what this really means is that we are stopping gracefully. We are stopping main web app version 1.0. There are existing user sessions out there, specifically one session, and it's my session since the application launched this welcome to WebLogic page. So I want to go ahead and close this tab, and I think I can force the session timeout. So go ahead and click on the application itself, and then click on monitoring. And you can see that we have one active session available here. So click on the session subtab. And it looks like we can't do anything about the active session. We've got a max inactive interval of 600 seconds. That's about 10 minutes. That's exactly 10 minutes. And that's 10 minutes from this time last access command. So when the session does time out, this application will be retired, and it will be removed from this table. But I can force it. So if you check the box next to the main web application and scroll down, you can do a stop, force stop now. Now the application shows up in a prepared state. So it's no longer accessible to the existing user session. And if you refresh the page again, now that you've stopped the application and essentially killed all the active sessions, you'll notice that the web app 1.0 application is now in a retired state. And this will remain in this table until you actually delete it. But the application is no longer active. It's been retired. It's no longer servicing any legacy requests or any future requests. So one last thing I want to show you before we end this lab is, since we specified stage as the staging mode, let's go ahead and take a look at the staging directory for the admin server. So go ahead and open up and go to your terminal window, and let's go to the admin server stage directory for the WL server domain. And it's going to be located under lab home domains WL server servers, and then the admin server is the one we want to look at. And so inside the admin server directory, and I've showed you this before, there's a stage directory. So inside stage, do a listing, and you'll see the main web app application. And if I go into the main web app application and I do a listing, you'll see 1.0 and 2.0. So WebLogic will keep both versions around until we clean them up. This allows you to redeploy an application later on if you have to. The files are already staged, so redeploying an application or upgrading an application is a fairly straightforward process. And so that's it for lab number 8. In the next lecture, we're going to talk about WebLogic